Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Nikhil Kumar. Today we are moving forward and getting our hands dirty with the Kubernetes. We will create our first pod and I will show you two ways to do it. The quick way is to use the kubectl run command, which we shown in our earlier videos using the kubectl run and create command, and the structured way using a YAML Manifest file. Today we are going to cover both of them. By the end of this video, we will know exactly how to spin up a pod in any Kubernetes cluster. If you're new to Kubernetes, you might wonder, why do we even need pod? Why not just run containers directly? Because Kubernetes does not manage individual containers. Instead, it manages pod. It acts as a wrapper around one or more container. Networking and storage. Container inside a pod share the same network namespace and can easily communicate with each other. Scalability and resilience. Pods are disposable and can be restarted and replicated whenever needed. Multi-container use cases. Sometimes multiple containers needed to work together inside the same pod. Let's take an example for this. Imagine an Nginx web server that serves content. You can add a logging sidecar container inside the same pod to collect the logs. Since both containers are inside the same pod, they share storage, network, and making communication seamless. What is pod? A pod is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. It encapsulates one or more containers, networking, and storage into a single unit. Types of pod: single container pod. The most common use case is to use the single container pod, where we need to deploy a Nginx web server. Multi-container pod. Use multiple containers need to work closely together. If we need one container to get the file to process and the another container will be using those information to update onto the website. Example, if you are running an Nginx web server, you will deploy an Nginx container inside a single container pod. Let's start with the fastest way to create a pod using a kubectl run command. So this is my Kubernetes cluster. So I'm going to run Nginx pod. So for that, I'm going to use a command kubectl run my web server and the image name, that is Nginx. So what happens here? Kubernetes run directly creates a pod and uses the official Nginx image. Now let's check the status of the pod. That is kubectl get pod is a command to check the status. So we can see the pod is running. Now to delete the pod, we have a command that is kubectl delete pod and the pod name, that is my web server. So pod got deleted. Let's verify that. So kubectl get pod is a command to verify that. Now the pod got deleted. Let's create a pod again. And now if we want to see the information about the pod, so we can use a command that is kubectl describe pod and the pod name, and this particular command give a complete set of events happen in the pod, and it also gives a complete set of information about the pod, that is under which namespace is being created, in which node it been got created, what are the labels, what is the IP of the pod, and which image is being used here. And if we go down, these are the events. So first of all, it assigns the pod to the respective node. Then it will pull the image. Once the image got pulled successfully, it will create a container that is a my web server. Now let's do the same thing but using a YAML file for better control. So here I am going to create a file that is nginx-pod.yml. So first of all, we need to specify the API version. So we have a keyword called API version. So this is the version of the Kubernetes API. So here I'm going to use a v1. Then we need to specify the kind, what kind of resource we need to create. So for now we are going to create a pod. So we need to use a pod. It is a case insensitive. So we need to use resource name with the uppercase. So it's always start with the uppercase. Then we need to give a metadata. Metadata is the information about the pod, like what is the name of the pod. I am giving my Nginx, and if we want to specify some labels, we can use the labels and use app and web. Then we have a spec. Spec is the main thing where we need to specify the container information, like which image to use, how many containers we can create. We know like we can create a multi-container pod as well, so we can specify the multi-container information here. For now I'm going with the one container, that is our Nginx. So here we need to use a containers, and it will be a list. Why? Because we can specify multiple containers, so we can specify the multiple container in a form of list. So I'm giving a name that is Nginx, and I'm specifying the image as well, that is Nginx. So this is the basic layout of the manifest file. The four component like API server, kind, metadata, and spec are remain same for all the resources, whether it's deployment, namespace, or the replica set. Don't worry, I am going to cover replica set deployment in my next video in very much detail. Now let's apply these changes using the kubectl create -f and the file name, and the pod got created, and we can verify that using the kubectl pod command, and we can see the pod got created with the name called my Nginx. And to see the more detailed information about this, so we can use the -o wide option, and we can see on which node the pod got created, what is the IP is assigned to that particular pod as well. The key benefits of using YAML is like it's easier to version control. It's a repeatable and reusable configuration, so we can share the configuration with any of our teammate to create a similar kind of pod on their environment as well. And we can define more settings like label, port, and resources in this. If you are experimenting, kubectl is fine, but for real world application, YAML is the way to go. Now you know how to create Kubernetes pod with and without YAML. In our next video, we will explore replication controller and deployment and how they differ from the pods and why they are the real way to manage application in the Kubernetes. So stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.